Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to tonight's event hosted by the Columbia Asian American Initiative. My name is Qing Gao. I'm a professor of social policy and the associate dean for doctoral education at the School of Social Work. I also have the great honor of serving as the acting director of Columbia's Asian American Initiative. Welcome to tonight's gathering. For those of you who are not affiliated with Columbia, I want to say a special welcome to you. Welcome to our campus, where groundbreaking research is being conducted, where knowledge and truth remain our fundamental pursuits, where students, faculty, and community members come together to dialogue, debate, and advance science. Columbia University has a long history, over 270 years old, but we never stop innovating and expanding. 2 years ago, we launched this Asian American Initiative. Our mission is to make the narratives of Asian Americans central to our understanding of America, and to forge a strong sense of belonging, confidence, and pride for Asian Americans and every American. We do so by building data and narratives and shaping policy and action. At the Columbia Asian American Initiative, we believe history matters and research is powerful. So tonight, we have the great honor of hosting this important reading and dialogue on Michael Luo's new book, Strangers in the Land, Exclusion, Belonging, and the Epic Story of the Chinese in America. The book tells the story of Chinese immigrants who, despite facing exclusion, violence, and discrimination, continued to stand up for their rights. I can say that I think all of you would agree it's ever more relevant today that we are facing the forever challenges of this exclusion and the rights for everyone. Michael, tonight is the first time we meet in person, but I actually knew you 10 years ago in October 2016 when you published that article that you wrote about your experience being told to go back to your country in your own neighborhood. I think that started a dialogue for many of us to consider identity, belonging, and who gets to claim to be American, right? So I'm so grateful that we are here gathered today. Even though that was an unpleasant experience, I'm glad it led you to write this book. 10 years later, we have the book for today and for future generations to read this book and get to know history. I want to say thank you to Anlan Chen, the founder and the chair and CEO of the Seroka Initiative, who first introduced Michael to us at Columbia, and we are honored to be able to host this event. Thank you, Anna. Yay. I also want to say thank you to Amy Hungerford, the Columbia's Executive Vice President for Arts and Sciences, who has offered unwavering support and championing for the Asian American Initiative. Thank you so much, Amy. And I'm so grateful to my colleagues, my amazing team who has worked behind the scenes for months to put this together. So if you could raise your hand and show us who you are, my team colleagues, thank you, thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. Now it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce our two speakers tonight. Michael Luo is an executive editor at The New Yorker, where he writes on politics, religion, and Asian American issues. He joined The New Yorker in 2016, and before that spent 13 years at The New York Times as a reporter, correspondent, and editor. His impressive work has been recognized by many major honors, including the George Polk Award and the Livingston Award. Michael, thank you. Welcome.
Okay.
Our moderator for tonight's event is Kat Chow, who is a journalist. Please come, both of you.
No, go.
Sorry, come. Yeah. And yeah. Okay. Michael Luo.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes. And Pat Chow, please. Yes. Pat is a journalist and writer, the author of Seeing Ghosts, a memoir, which is named a notable book by the New York Times and a finalist for the Connecticut Book Award. She's currently the Newsday Leventhal visiting assistant professor at Columbia's Graduate School of Journalism, where we are gathered tonight. Thank you, Pat. Okay, before turning it over to you both, I want to say a special welcome and thank you to our students. We do these events, we do research, we have these dialogues for you because we think you're the future of everything, particularly the Asian American initiative. We believe in the value that you're leading the future. Recently, I heard from a student who was newly admitted to Columbia College. He wrote to me, I'm a sixth generation Chinese American and second generation Korean American. I've often felt there are too few opportunities for me to learn how Asian Americans have shaped US history and culture. I'm eager to engage with the Asian American Initiative at Columbia to join others to advocate for greater Asian American representation in our society. So I think that captures our spirit for tonight's dialogue perfectly. So thank you very much. And I will turn it over to Michael first to give a reading, and then Kat will moderate the conversation, both first between the two of them and then with the audience members. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you, everybody, for having me here. Thank you to Anla and the Serica Initiative, and thank you to the Asian American Initiative. So I actually haven't done a reading at a book event because I'm often worried that my droning on in my own words will bore you. But I was asked to do this reading, and just to give you a little context, I chose a passage from the chapter on the Rock Springs Massacre, which we can talk about in the kind of context of the events, but it was kind of like this tipping point for this chain of events, really, called that historians call the driving out in the mid-1880s, when nearly 200 communities in the American West expelled the Chinese, in some cases violently. I'm guessing most of you are like me, who have never heard of the driving out. I hadn't until I wrote a piece for the New Yorker, drawing on some books that from Asian American historians. And so I'm really proud of the chapter I wrote about the Rock Springs Massacre. It was a seminal event. 28 Chinese miners were killed, dozens others injured, and the New Yorker, my boss David Remnick excerpted a chapter in the New Yorker, and so this is part of it. So the passage I chose is just to set the scene, is this kind of moment when the massacre really begins, and so I'll just read to you a short passage. They came from two different directions, Chinese witnesses later said. One group crossed a plank bridge over Bitter Creek, and another advanced toward Chinatown from the railroad tracks. Squads of men encircled the quarter. A group stationed near a pump house opened fire first. A man named Lor Sin Kit was the first resident struck. A bullet pierced his right arm and lodged in his back. He crumpled to the ground, wounded but still alive. The rioters shot the 56-year-old miner Liu Dai Ba, who had a wife and two children back home in China, in the chest near the bridge, killing him. Another man, Yip Arman, who was 38 years old and lived in the eastern part of the quarter, was also shot dead. Panic ensued in the dugouts and other buildings. Dozens of men were inside a two-story building at the end of the quarter. The sound of arguing came from inside. As the mob advanced, men jumped out of windows and fled. When the rioters began battering down the door, the occupants came pouring out. Some 500 to 600 people lived in the Chinese encampment. Most of them were home at the time of the attack. They fled in all directions. One witness later described the hills to the east of the town literally blue with the hunted Chinamen. Liu Kuokang, who had been getting treatment for his wounds at the number 3 mine just beyond the Chinese quarter when he saw armed men approaching. He ran for the hills. He later compared Chinese residents to a flock of frightened sheep. Leo spent several days wandering through the sagebrush with nothing to eat. He finally found the railroad tracks and caught a train to Evanston. Many Chinese tumbled down the steep banks of Bitter Creek, splashing into the muddy water. At least one man was cut down, struggling to clamber up the bank on the other side. His body was found later, half submerged in the creek. Another miner, Leo Mawick, another member of the Leo clan, had also been working the number 6 mine that morning. He had returned to the Chinese encampment and was inside his hut when a member of the mob ordered him to step outside. As soon as he emerged, he heard gunshots and set off on a run. While he was fleeing, a bullet went through his right arm. He didn't stop running until about 4 o'clock in the morning when he reached the neighboring town of Green River, the county seat and the closest other population center, about 15 miles to the west. The violence coursed through town like a river, drawing in men, women, and children. One female resident whose home was near the plank bridge pointed a revolver at the terrified Chinese men fleeing past her and fired 3 shots in quick succession, felling 2 of them. This was likely Mrs. Osborne, the owner of a laundry in town, who was later celebrating for killing 2 Chinese men. Another woman had an infant in her arms, but she still managed to knock down a Chinese man running by. When her baby wailed, she spanked him before turning to pummel the Chinese man some more. The rioters began setting fire to the buildings in the Chinese encampment. Dense black smoke billowed over the quarter. Frightened residents dashed outside with blankets covering their heads. The bodies of dead Chinese lay everywhere. Riders tossed corpses into the burning buildings. The smell of burning flesh was acrid. A gusting wind led to fears that the conflagration would spread to the rest of town. Rioters suspended their torches in the Chinese huts, but more than 40 homes burned to the ground. Miners usually stored the black powder they used in their homes. When the licking flames reached a cache, the sky would flash with a powerful explosion. A group of rioters descended upon a dugout belonging to a laundryman, Ali, who had barricaded himself inside. The members of the mob fired through the window. A single shot rang out from inside the building. He was armed. Attackers broke through the roof and a brief scuffle followed. Afterward, Ali lay dead on the floor with a gunshot wound to the back of his head. A female rioter stomped on his body. Another looted bundles of laundry he had laid out for delivery. Ah Kun took shelter in a cellar. When he emerged at about 8 o'clock in the evenings, several white men spotted him. When the men opened fire, Ah Kun ran. In his panic, he dropped about $1,600 in gold that he had been carrying. He had made his way to a railroad section house east of town where a white resident gave him bread and water and allowed him to rest before he started walking towards Evanston. Several Chinese residents approached the Reverend Timothy Thurloway, who lived near Chinatown with his wife and 2 daughters. In the evenings, the Thurloways taught English to Chinese miners. The frightened Chinese residents asked if they could hide inside their home, but the family advised them that it wouldn't be safe and sent them away. One miner, known as China Joe, who worked in the number 3 mine, hid in a large oven for 3 days before sneaking out in the middle of the night and fleeing to Green River. A Chinese clerk who worked in the company's general store survived by hiding in the cellar for a week. At around 7 o'clock in the evening, Dave Thomas visited Chinatown with several other men to inspect the situation. They spotted an elderly Chinese man they knew lying in agony in the dirt, but still alive. They debated whether to end his suffering by shooting him, but they left him to die. They saw the body of another Chinese man who went by Joe Brown. He had apparently been one of the first to be killed. Joseph Young, the recently elected sheriff of Sweetwater County, arrived from Green River and deployed deputies around the center of town. He struggled, however, to muster enough men in Rock Springs to form a posse to hunt down the rioters. Throughout the night, gunfire continued to pop off. Rioters recrossed the creek to torch the remaining buildings in the Chinese Quarter. The fires burned all night, bathing the town in a red glow.
Wow. Thank you for that. So I also just wanted to say thank you everyone to coming out today. This is, I think, a really important book, and I'm so glad to be in conversation with you. Thank you also to Qingao, Amy, Anna from the Circa Foundation. And thank you to the journalism students here who are out today instead of reporting tonight and going to get those stories. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces. I had the pleasure of reading this book over the course of a few months, and it was a little strange because I was listening as an audiobook, and then I would also bring this around with me. And I remember having this experience, listening to some of these early chapters, including, what you just read, while also going between NPR newscasts. My background is I was an NPR reporter covering race for many years. And the resonances between what I was listening to and then also some major, discussion in the news about birthright citizenship felt very resonant. And for years now, we've been seeing history have its callbacks. But I wanted to go back to 2016, which Chin Gao also referenced.
Right.
There was this moment when you were an editor at the New York Times working for Race Related. Can you just walk us through that moment that led to this book? And sorry to bring you back to it.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, so first I'll say about this moment, it's a very ordinary moment in some ways, even though it was, traumatic and I wrote about it. But I think what it was that so many people, there was a resonance of it. And so what happened was it was a Sunday afternoon on the Upper East Side. It was like 68th and Lex, I think. And I was out with a group of our friends, all Asian American. As a group of families, we were trying to decide where to go for lunch after church. And this woman was I described her as kind of this well-dressed woman. She looked like she could have been a mom in my kid's preschool. She had one of these fancy big iPhones at that time, iPhone Pro or something like that. And she was annoyed. This group of Asian Americans were blocking the way, and she brushed past us, and she said, as she brushed past us, "Go back to China." And so, even though I should have let it go, it was the Sunday after church. I should have turned the other cheek. And but I abandoned my younger daughter in her stroller. Not very good.
You left the stroller on the sidewalk.
Yes, I did. And I ran after her down the sidewalk and kind of got a little bit in her face and I was essentially asking, like, "Are you serious? Did you just say that?" And we just kind of went back and forth. This is when she took out her phone and she was recording me. That's why I knew what kind of phone she had. And then she just we were going back and forth, and then she screamed, "Go back to your fucking country." And in all the adrenaline that was running, because this was happening in broad daylight, and it's like there's like a confrontation on the street. I was like, I was born in this country. That was like my
That was your comeback.
that was my comeback, which is such a pathetic comeback. And then and this was in the heyday of Twitter. I was kind of like, I went back into the restaurant and we sat down, and my wife was really annoyed at me. And I'm just kind of live texting, like tweeting, like what happened.
I remember this too.
Yeah, in this series of tweets. And I used this hashtag, "This is 2016, because I was kind of like, can you believe it? This is the year 2016. This is still happening. And that went viral. Like, it was like, I just remember it just kind of took off, and like Bill de Blasio like tweeted back at me, like, and it's like, it's like there's no place for that in New York City or whatever. You're welcome anytime, Mike. And then I wrote a piece for the New York Times. This is just a quick web piece, and I wrote it as an open letter to this woman, and I wrote about just this feeling of otherizing that is, has been a theme throughout Asian American history, and I wrote about this kind of sadness I felt that as I was walking home that day, thinking about I'm 2 generations removed from my parents' immigrant. I'm 1 generation. My parents came in the early 1970s, late 1960s. I was born in the United States as with my brother, and my kids are, 2 generations removed from their grandparents' immigrant experience. And I was just thinking about this feeling of, will they ever feel like they truly belong? And that piece just took off too. And then the other extraordinary thing was the New York Times published it on the front page of the newspaper the
That's a
next day, which
big
is incredible.
deal. Yeah.
Incredible decision because it was of the subject, but also because it was like written in like this open letter sort of way. So it was very non-traditional. And then that led to just this, I joke, we did, this is like kind of community engagement 101 is like, we just kind of kept this dialogue and we asked readers to send videos in of their own experiences, and that went viral. And I joked that I was, for a couple of weeks, I was the face of Asian America. So the story is that I was on a panel at Columbia about race, where Jelani Cobb, who's not here, now a colleague of mine at the New Yorker,
And the
was on
dean of
panel.
the J School.
Yeah, at the dean of the J School, and he was on the panel. And if you know Jelani, he's a historian by training, and he speaks in these full, rolling paragraphs of context about history that he brings to the table when talking about these issues. I was just this guy that had this thing happen to him, and I was, pretending to speak for Asian Americans, and I just felt this kind of imposter syndrome, this kind of need to know and root myself more in history, and that stuck with me, and then I went to the New Yorker very soon after, so I had a very busy new
Very busy
job.
fall. Yeah.
Yes, and then the pandemic happened. We were dealing with that incredible feeling of vulnerability that so many Asian Americans felt. If you remember that period of and the Atlanta spa attacks happened. It was just we just had an anniversary of this.
Yeah.
Where several Asian immigrant women were killed by white gunmen. And I wrote a piece for the New Yorker about this long history of anti-Asian violence that drew on a couple of books, including Beth Lou Williams, who I heard is going to be here in a couple of weeks. She wrote this book, Chinese Must Go. Gordon Chang at Stanford. There's a book called Driven Out. That touches on this kind of driving out sort of period that I was talking about, and I that piece, which kind of tried to connect the dots from then till now, that was the kind of basis for the conversations with publishers that happened soon after, and I signed the contract for this book in the summer.
That's what really led to this giant.
Yeah, it happened very fast. I mean, this is a little window into, I don't know how your experience was. Her book is gorgeous. I was just reading it last week. But my process happened very fast. Like I wrote this piece, and I think their publishers at the time felt like they really didn't have authors who could write on this subject matter, and they also a secret of publishing, which is they care just as much as for the messenger as the message, and so somebody with a platform at the New Yorker like me, and so before I knew it, I was signing up to do this book.
Giant history.
And there really is kind of like, this is now my response to that woman. I had a terrible, inadequate response, but now if I saw her, I could hand her.
I know. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? You go from I was born here to I wrote 160,000 words and 500 and how many pages?
Yeah.
42 pages in the paperback.
Yes.
as a response to that woman. I will actually add to that, around the same time that microaggression happened to you, I remember I was biking to NPR and someone yelled at me, "Konnichiwa," and my response was, "I'm Chinese. You should say ni hao." And then I was like, "But I'm also Chinese American." And I yelled this while biking away. But in retrospect, I've been taking so much Cantonese because my family is Cantonese. I should have said, you should probably say "nei hao." But
a lot to say. And
there's just too much nuance. I mean, that's why you
Yeah.
have to write a 500 something page
Yeah.
book.
yes.
That is quite the origin story. And so early on in the book, you have this wonderful, wonderful epigraph that I think speaks to how immersed in the world of Asian America you are.
Yeah.
And the epigraph is actually from one of my favorite novels, Interior Chinatown by Charles Yu. If any of you have had the chance or have not had the chance yet, go read the book, go watch the Hulu adaptation. It's very funny. But the epigraph reads, "The question is, who gets to be an American? What does an American look like?" So why start the book off with that? And I think that can be a good way into this conversation.
Totally. Incredible book. I had the privilege of having an event in LA with Charles where he was my conversation partner. It was a thrill. That book really influenced me. Like it won the National Book Award, I think in 2020, I think.
Yeah.
And so that book, if you guys don't know it, is a kind of an imaginary the central the main protagonist is a kind of a character actor. He's generic Asian man in a TV police procedural about a black cop and a white cop.
Kind of like Law and Order, if you
Yeah,
imagine
exactly.
that.
And so the show is called Black and White. And you know, if it's not obvious, his book is like an indictment of the way race in America is often viewed solely through the lens of black and white. And there's this scene, whether that the epigraph comes from, where the main character is kind of doing this kind of a soliloquy in a courtroom scene where he's kind of litigating his case, and he says, "Who gets to be an American? What does an American look like?" And it goes on, and I'm going to butcher some of this, but it's like we've been here for nearly 200 years, and why do we keep falling out of the story? And so that is that is like kind of the driving thrust of why I wrote the book. And I'm not the first person to write about this history. There's incredible historians who came before me. Mei Nai, who's a treasure, national treasure, really, who's at Columbia. Erica Lee, like there's so Iris Chang wrote this book called The Chinese in America that was published in 2000-ish. That is kind of the closest kind of to what I was trying to do. But what I think every historian, author who writes about history writes out of their current sort of moment. And I really was trying to write about how I described the book in my elevator pitch as like a narrative history of Chinese exclusion from the gold rush to the 1960s when my parents came to America. And Chinese exclusion, which actually was not a single law, but actually a series of laws that passed in the end of the 19th century and was made permanent in the beginning of the 20th century and was formally lifted in 1943 when China and the United States were allies in the war against Japan. But at that point, only like 109 Chinese were admitted under their quota. So it really wasn't lifted until 1965 and the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is extraordinary. That's recent history, and that Chinese exclusion passed in this period of the end of Reconstruction. That kind of the kind of vanquishing of Reconstruction, really the overthrow of Reconstruction that happened in the South. the driving out of native peoples in the West, and this was happening all at the same time, and I think we have a much better kind of grasp of the end of Reconstruction and the horror that brought and how we live with that today. I feel like in terms of the writing American history to include indigenous people and kind
Yes.
of that has really experienced in the last couple of years, I feel like a big sort of resurgence of some big books that have come out. And I really feel like Chinese exclusion needs to be part of that conversation, and it's not.
Absolutely. And there are some really, really huge names that you mention in this book and that you do so much work narrativizing. I'm really glad that you put it that way, as though, this book, the goal of it was to narrativize Chinese exclusion and its story, because the passage that you read took a lot of work, and we've emailed a little bit about your process with the archives. And I remember when I was reading and listening to this the first go around, I kept thinking, oh my gosh, that must have been so many newspaper clippings that you went through, or transcripts. Can you talk about that process also, of what it was like to find these early records and how you pieced them all together? Because
Yeah.
that's hard.
Yeah, totally. Thank you. I guess a couple things. One is I'm an investigative reporter by background, and there are kind of two kinds of investigative reporters. I feel like there are kind of source guys, like people who are really good at getting sources to kind of open up and talk, and maybe.
And they're always working the phone.
Yeah, working the phones, meeting in person. Ronan Farrow, who we just published a big piece about Sam Altman about. He's a great source guy. He's incredible at getting people to go on the record. And then there are kind of documents, investigative reports and kind of data investigative reports. And I was more in that zone. And so what I did was each chapter, it's almost like 25 magazine stories. There's 26 chapters, I think. And each chapter in many cases is narrativizing a particular episode, or not every chapter is like that, but there's many chapters that are kind of like, okay, this is the Rock Springs chapter, and this is the Los Angeles Chinese Massacre chapter.
Too, where it kind of leads up to arrivals, passages, belonging.
Yeah. And so each chapter, the way my technique worked is I used Evernote, even though it's a terrible program.
Wow. I thought you were going to say Scrivener.
No, I couldn't figure out Scrivener, to be honest. So each time I had a blow-by-blow. In some cases, it's like, years, and then months, and then days, and then sometimes minutes chronology that had. So all the documents I would photograph and convert into PDFs, and then I would just kind of cut them up into these chronologies. And so
you made this giant timeline.
Okay. Yeah. So then you sit down to write, and you have it all in front of you. And so, this was, I guess, a couple things, like, one, I really benefited from the digitization of newspapers that has happened. And I'm actually, I feel like, the first to approach this history that has benefited from now you can go on newspapers.com, and you can go to 1871, and you can read newspapers in Los Angeles about the Chinese massacre in Los Angeles, and you can search Chinaman or something like that, and it'll come up, and all those historians who slaved away at their microfilm machines. I'm sorry, it's a different.
A lot of those.
It's a different world. So that was very helpful. Each chapter has its own sort of trove of documents. Like one place that I that comes to mind that was just really, really cool was the Presbyterian Historical Society of America, which is in Philadelphia. And I think that's the second chapter is about a trial in which some Chinese miners were killed by a white man in California, and it led to a decision in the California Supreme Court that ruled that Chinese testimony was inadmissible in court against a white man because of a law that was on the books that said, it said like, I think it said the language of the law was Negroes, Indians, and I mean, there's a list of people, but didn't include Chinese because Chinese, when the law was written, weren't in California, and so there was this
Weren't even
whole
on the map. Yeah.
yeah. So there was this whole kind of legal interpretation of what does the Chinese count as? Like, do they count as white? Do they count as
Right.
Negro, Indian, whatever?
Not yet Oriental.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So anyway, so there was the translator at that trial was a Presbyterian missionary to the Chinese who went out to this little mining town in Nevada City. His name is William Spear, and he wrote letters to the Presbyterian Mission Board, including about this trial. And so, getting that is one of the only kind of accounts of, this trial that exists.
Wow.
And they're like these short little newspaper snippets. But like, I think I listed in my acknowledgements the number of places I went. It was a lot of places. I also
A lot of historical societies, I
Yes.
imagine.
Yes, totally. Oh, and do we want to show a little bit of
Let's
this?
do it.
Yes, yes.
Tell us what this
Yeah,
is.
yeah. Maybe I'll
Yeah,
take a
you
little
do it.
thing. So this was just a little find that I talk about. So this was at the California Historical Society. They had this little notebook. It's like a ledger book, and you could see this little red cover. So they didn't know what it was, and so there's like some like little handwriting on, and then it says here, John T. Mason, Downeyville, Justice of the Peace, April 8th, 1890. And so then you see that all these pages of Chinese names
Oh, yeah.
written down.
Hot toy.
Yes, yeah. And then the book is basically full of photographs. Here, I'll just kind of click through some of these. And so they didn't know what it was. And so just and it was incredible for me to see because a big thing I'm trying to do is humanize these people
And who they were.
Yeah, and so seeing their faces is actually feels very intimate, but also really like very frustrating because you don't really know their whole story. And so I ended up sort of like doing some digging, and I put together what was going on. And so John T. Mason was a constable in this old gold mining town called Downeyville, and there was something called the Geary Act that was passed, which is it was a renewal of the Chinese exclusion law. Came up for renewal every 10 years. And when every time they made the law more and more onerous. And so one of the new requirements was that Chinese be photographed and have to register. And so the extraordinary story of the Geary Act is that the Chinese Six Companies, which is this kind of group of mutual aid associations that kind of functioned as the leaders of the Chinese community, actually persuaded more than 100,000 Chinese in America to refuse to register. So like this act of mass resistance, they faced the threat of arrest and deportation. And so they persuaded everyone to not register and donate $1 to a legal fund where they would bring a legal challenge. And so went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they lost. And then the Chinese ended up coming forward to be photographed and registered. I mean, one incidental thing, just kind of the resonances of history, is that when the Chinese refused en masse to register, there was talk of mass deportations. And of course, the thing about mass deportations, they quickly realized they didn't have the money to deport everybody. Like there was like these articles about the Treasury Department reporting they only had like $30,000 or whatever available.
Then the question is, where do you put them?
Yeah, exactly. And so they set it aside. And so anyway, so this guy, John T. Mason, he had a brother-in-law who was a photographer who came to town and then on a single day photographed 170 some Chinese
Wow.
in the
With all
Daniel
the
area.
relevant information in their eyes, which is height. So this person,
age 56, 4 feet 11 and a quarter inches high.
Amun mother.
Yeah. So this one's cool. So this is kind of like I wrote a whole section of a chapter on this. And so Amun, it says mother, and then later we found Kwok Moon, who is 22 years old, and I looked through census records. He was born in Allegheny, which is nearby, and he's her son, and he's an American citizen because he was born in the United States. But and then I don't know if you can see this, but this is this woman, young woman down here, age 18. She was born in New York City. And so she was an American citizen, somehow ended up in Downeyville. And so then you start to see these notations of down near the bottom, it says gone to China for good, 1900. And then you see, so here it said here up top here, Nung Owen, told never to come back.
Wow.
Went to China September 1906, told never to come back.
Can you imagine being the one to decide that that's what you would annotate?
Yeah.
Told
And
never
then
to come back.
And then so this one said down here at the bottom, it says gone to China, never to return, December 1894. And then you start to see like really kind of foreboding things. It says froze to death on Lost Creek, February 1895. And then this one says dead, 1900. This one says died, 1905. Killed by
something on Middle Fork.
Middle Fork, yeah. And then this one says died in hospital. But then, these are all dead. And then, these are more dead. And then this one says burned.
So it gets very bleak.
Yeah. And so it's so anyways, basically what it looks like is I think he was monitoring the Chinese in his community over many, many years in a way that he was not required to do under the law, but just decided to do.
This was just his hobby, how he decided to.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And so then at the end, these are newer photographs, and it's really interesting because like time has passed, and this is 1927, and this is 1930, and there's sort of like a degree of affluence, it seems like, and yet they still were coming forward and being photographed. And so, anyways, like that. There's a this was one of my kind of triumphant moments of historical discovery, of kind of unlocking the story of what happened in this. Actually, Erica Lee actually included some of these photographs in one of her books.
She's a scholar in Minnesota who wrote The Making of Asian America.
Yeah, and she's now at Harvard. She's kind of the giant of the field, and I called her up and I was like, "Hey, I figured out what happened," and anyways, and so yeah, so that's what the archives can sometimes reveal.
Yeah. So you,
yeah.
this was during the pandemic when you were starting to comb through these, and then you
Yeah.
began piecing together stories. There are a couple of names that come up throughout the, oh, and I want to be cognizant of time. So in about a few minutes, we're going to move on to audience questions. There's a microphone in the back, and we can have you line up there and ask Michael some questions. But I guess my last question really is about the resonances that we see between today and also what you were looking at then. Of course, it's we've been seeing birthright citizenship come up a lot in the news, and a name is in headlines frequently, which is the name of Wong Kim Ark, who you write about in a great deal. And can you tell the story of Wong Kim Ark and then also his relative that you had the chance to speak with?
Totally.
His great-grandson,
Norman. Yeah. So Wong Kim Ark, hopefully you know his name. He was born in San Francisco, above like his grocery store. He would go back and forth to China, and he had gone back and forth multiple times. Every time that he went, he would get this kind of testimony, like an attestation, like kind of a affidavit from somebody who knew him when he or his family when they were born, so he can come back in and say, I remember, Wong Kim Ark and his
born here.
Yeah, and he was born here in, San Francisco. So then he came back and in, I think it was like 1894. I think that I'm trying to get the years right. He came back in, and it's interesting when you look at his immigration file. There seem to be at some points like kind of doubting his story, and so they're like kind of like, oh, I went to the grocery store, it's not there anymore, and I asked around, and it's not clear whether the dad was here or whatever.
Or the description of the village is different.
Yeah, and but then basically at some point they conclude, the immigration officials, that he was born in America, and but they decide to detain him because the Justice Department and also the customs inspectors of who are the people responsible for, at that point, for immigration, wanted to bring a test case to the Supreme Court about birthright citizenship. The 14th Amendment says if you are born in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof, you are a citizen of the United States. There was a kind of a kooky lawyer named George Collins who was writing law journal articles around this period, advancing the theory that focusing on that clause, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, basically saying that he couldn't have been Chinese, even if they're born here, because their parents are citizens of the Empire of China. They're not really subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And this is actually the exact same clause that the Trump administration is keen on in their challenge to birthright citizenship for people who have a parent who is either undocumented or not a permanent resident or citizen. They're contesting that the Trump administration is trying to make the case that they're not subject to the jurisdiction thereof. And so went all the way to Supreme Court, and
they rule in favor, 6-2.
They rule in favor of him. It's actually kind of a really hard to follow decision, but one really key, because they're invoking like common law and like the way, like, the legal history of it. But one kind of, it seems to me when I read the opinion, the decisive thing was basically the justice was like, wait, but this means that if we threw this out, this means like thousands, hundreds of thousands of Irish Americans, Scottish Americans, they would not be citizens. And that was like, seemed like beyond the pale of like what was conceivable. Can't do that. So upheld birthright citizenship, and the one interesting thing that is less known about Wong Kim Ark is this didn't end his problems with
That's
immigration.
exactly what I was going to bring up.
Which is fascinating. Like he ended up down near El Paso, Texas, and kind of going back and forth across the border with Mexico, where there's a large, actually Chinese population in El Paso.
And he had multiple children too, who he
Yeah.
was trying to get into the States.
Yeah. So what happened is one thing that happened was he was arrested in El Paso, and they were challenging whether he had violated the Chinese Exclusion Act, and the newspaper is like, they know who he is. They're like this guy who is the subject of this just Supreme Court decision. Finally, they release him, and then yes, he had several sons who were born in China, but because they are his sons through derivative citizenship, they are citizens of the United States. They come into the United States to try to enter and get hassled, each of them, and detained and interrogated at length by immigration officials. One of them was actually sent back and not allowed into the country, and then 3 sons were allowed to enter finally. And so the extraordinary thing about this is Wong Kim Ark's descendants are alive today.
Yes.
It's like, and so
before you tell that story, can I actually read a paragraph from your book
yeah.
that I found
Yeah.
really powerful about Wong Kim Ark? And this is about Wong Kim Ark's sort of ending and his ultimate death. But in the summer of 1931, Wong made another trip back to China, his 6th visit during his lifetime. He was in his early 60s, but in the photograph he took before his departure, he appeared older. His hair had grown wispy and turned gray. His face was weathered and mottled. White appeared in his stubble. He never returned to America. On August 26, 1936, he died in Ong Sing Village. The country to which he ostensibly belonged, the United States, had never stopped treating him with suspicion. I found that to be tremendous and powerful and quite sad, actually.
Yeah, totally. And so the way his sons were hassled and things like that. And then so the extraordinary thing about it is like, so when we think of this history, you think of it as, like you see these photos and it's kind of hard for us to relate because there's like I feel like there's the distance of time that there's a lot of these men wore queues and but the thing is, it's actually not that long ago. And so I recently last year I hadn't actually talked to them for the book, but like last year I had the chance to have breakfast with Norman Wong, who is so he is either the grandson or the great grandson of Wong Kim Ark.
Yeah.
Which is extraordinary, because he talks about his dad. So for most of his life, Norman and his siblings had no idea their connection to this history. And then I think it was in the late 1990s, around the 100th anniversary of the Wong Kim Ark case, a Chinese newspaper did a story about Wong Kim Ark's descendants, and they interviewed Norman's dad. And so he goes to their house with his wife one day, and they're like pointed to this newspaper article, and they actually don't they don't read Chinese, and they don't fully understand what's going on, but they're like, they got that there's something important, that their ancestor did something really important. And then this kind of Norman and then one of his sisters got really kind of interested in the history and started to try to research it more.
Imagine if your grandfather or great grandfather just happened to be this person who brought forward.
No, and actually one of the I think it was Norman's niece, like one of the descendants actually was kind of like college age and went to San Bruno, the National Archives in San Bruno, and to research there, because you can go and see your ancestors' immigration files, and they walk into San Bruno, the National Archives, and a staff person says, announces to the room, this is the granddaughter, of Wong Kim Ark, and the staff stood up and applauded, and they were like, "We have been waiting for you." Like they had this file and no one had come, to look. And so anyway, so Norman has become, he's now in his late 70s, and he's become, in the last like year, because of the challenge to birthright citizens, has become this like late in life activist. He was like a carpenter, or like he worked as like he maintained apartment buildings. And now he gave a speech on the steps of the Supreme Court, recently, when during oral arguments, and he does interviews with people like me, and the thing that's and the thing that just really struck me about it is that it really uh, it is like the whole apocryphal line from Mark Twain that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Whether he said that or not, it's a good line.
Very good line.
And then um, it's really not that long ago.
It's not that long ago. I mean, it feels very resonant. I mean, 1965 was when these exclusion laws were overturned and the quota system, was really put into place. But I think we are all feeling those effects now. And I think this is a really good time to open up the floor to some audience questions.